He had always loved music. From the time he could remember, the piano was more than an instrument. It was a friend, a teacher, and a place where he could escape the noise of the world. He grew up in a small, quiet neighborhood where few people had the patience or the time to understand the kind of dedication music demanded. His family supported him in small ways, giving him a piano secondhand from a neighbor, encouraging him when he practiced for hours, even when his fingers ached and his back hurt from long hours of sitting. Every day he would wake up early and practice before school, and then again in the evening after finishing his homework. He had a notebook filled with compositions, ideas, and melodies he had created over the years. Most people didn't know about it because he rarely played them for anyone. There was a modesty in him, a quiet belief that music should be felt first and only then shared. Sometimes, when he played for his family, he could see their surprise and admiration, but often it was just him alone, fingers gliding over the keys, shaping sound into something only he could understand. Despite his passion, life was not always easy. He struggled to find opportunities to perform, and most venues wanted flashy, well-known musicians. Many times, he applied to concerts or competitions and was rejected. Some told him he was talented but not polished enough. Others said he didn't have the stage presence to captivate an audience. These words could have discouraged him, but he never let them. Instead, they fueled him. Each rejection was a push to practice more, to refine his technique, and to explore the emotions behind every note he played. One day, he heard about a prestigious film studio that was looking for a pianist to audition for a new movie soundtrack. The news sent a thrill through him. He knew this could be a big opportunity, a chance to show his music to people who might really listen. But with excitement came nerves. The audition would be held in a large, formal hall with a panel of directors and producers, some of whom were known to be very critical. He imagined the room in his mind. Polished floors, bright lights, and a grand piano at the center. He imagined the people seated in their chairs, waiting to be impressed. And he imagined himself, a simple young man with his notebook of compositions, trying to prove that his music could speak louder than appearances. The day of the audition arrived, and he stepped into the studio with a mixture of anxiety and determination. He wore simple clothes, nothing flashy, nothing designed to draw attention. Other musicians were already there, dressed in tailored suits or elegant dresses, carrying themselves with the confidence of those used to being admired. When he walked past them, some exchanged amused looks, whispers following in his wake. They laughed quietly to themselves, thinking he didn't belong in the same room with them. Even some staff members smiled knowingly, underestimating him without a second thought. He felt the weight of their expectations, or rather, their lack of them. But he didn't let it bother him. He focused on the piano, on the feel of the keys under his fingers, and on the music that had been living in him for years. This was the moment he had prepared for in countless small practices, in quiet nights and early mornings. He had imagined this exact moment, not the judgment, but the opportunity to pour his soul into the instrument. The director called out the first name, and a well-dressed pianist confidently stepped up. She played a fast, flashy piece that showed technical skill, but as the notes echoed through the hall, the room remained polite but unimpressed. The panel nodded occasionally, but there was no real spark, no sense of emotion that touched anyone's heart. One by one, other musicians performed, each trying to outshine the last with complexity and speed. Some stumbled, some played perfectly but felt empty, and some were loud, demanding attention without giving anything of themselves. The young man waited quietly, watching, listening, learning from the reactions of the audience. Finally, his name was called. A ripple of amusement went through the room. Some of the other musicians smirked, some shook their heads, and a few whispered to each other, clearly expecting nothing from him. He walked confidently to the piano, though inside his heart was a steady drum of nerves. He took a moment to sit down, adjusted the bench, and let his hands hover over the keys. He closed his eyes briefly, recalling the countless hours of practice, the moments of doubt, the quiet victories no one had seen. Then he began to play. The first notes were soft, almost hesitant, but they carried a warmth and honesty that immediately caught the attention of some listeners. The room was filled with music that didn't need to be fast or flashy to command attention. It told a story of struggle, hope, and perseverance, and slowly, the laughter and smirks faded. People began to lean forward in their seats, drawn into the sound that was unlike anything they had expected. Even the director, who had been reviewing notes on a clipboard, paused and lifted his head, intrigued by the gentle unfolding of the melody. The young man played with his whole being, letting each note speak with emotion. He didn't think about impressing anyone or competing with the others. He only thought about the story he wanted the music to tell. The hall seemed to disappear around him. There were no whispers, no judging eyes, just the resonance of the piano and the honesty of the performance. Every chord, every pause, every rise and fall of the melody was filled with years of dedication and passion. By the end of the piece, the room was silent. It wasn't the polite silence of the audience trying not to make a scene. It was the stunned, breathless silence of people who had just witnessed something remarkable. The laughter that had greeted him when he walked in had completely vanished. The director leaned forward, eyes wide, unable to hide his astonishment. Even the other musicians, who had been so sure of themselves, looked shocked. The young man simply sat there, hands resting lightly on the keys, letting the music linger in the air before he stood up and gave a small, humble nod. In that moment, he realized that all the struggles, all the moments of being underestimated, had led to this. The room had judged him at first glance, but he had let his music speak for him. And it had silenced the doubt, the laughter, and the skepticism. It had shown that true talent comes from passion, practice, and honesty, not appearances or outward confidence. The young man walked away from the piano that day with a quiet satisfaction, knowing that his music had finally been heard and appreciated in the way he had always hoped. He didn't need applause or praise to feel accomplished, though the recognition he received later was certainly meaningful. What mattered most was the realization that he had stayed true to himself, to his music, and to the countless hours he had devoted to his art. That day marked the beginning of a journey where his compositions would touch more hearts than he had ever imagined. All because he had believed in his own quiet talent when the world initially laughed. And for him, that was worth more than anything else. After the first performance, the young pianist could feel a mixture of relief and excitement. He had poured his heart into the music, and for a moment, all the doubts and whispers in the room seemed to vanish. But the audition wasn't over yet. There was still a challenge ahead, one that would test not just his skill, but his ability to remain calm under pressure and to stay true to the music he believed in. The director stood and addressed the room, his voice calm but commanding. He explained that each musician would now have a chance to perform an original piece, one that truly represented their style and emotional depth. The young pianist knew that this was his chance to shine. He had always composed his own music, pieces that reflected his experiences, feelings, and the small, quiet moments of life that most people overlooked. He had been saving these compositions for the right time, and now he realized that this was it. Around him, other musicians were busy preparing. Some whispered strategies to each other, talking about how to impress the director with speed, complexity, or dramatic gestures. Others practiced quickly, trying to polish their pieces in the final minutes. He watched silently, noticing the tension in their movements and the nervous energy that filled the room. He didn't feel that way. Instead, he closed his eyes for a moment and took a deep breath, letting his mind focus entirely on the music he wanted to share. When it was his turn, he walked up to the grand piano again. The polished wood gleamed under the bright studio lights, and the keys seemed to call to him. He felt a familiar comfort as he sat down and adjusted the bench. This piano had never felt intimidating to him. It was simply a tool to bring his emotions to life. As he opened his music notebook, he didn't read from it. He had memorized the piece completely. The notebook was more like a personal diary, a reminder of the journey that had brought him here. He placed his hands on the keys and paused. The room was filled with whispers and the soft shuffling of papers as the other musicians watched. Some still looked doubtful, remembering how he had walked in quietly, with simple clothes and an unassuming demeanor. A few even smiled to themselves, certain that the next few minutes would prove that he was not worthy of the stage. But he didn't notice their expressions. His mind was focused on the music, on the story he wanted to tell. The first few notes floated into the air, soft and gentle. They were simple, almost fragile, but filled with a quiet beauty that made people stop and listen. The young pianist didn't rush. He allowed each note to resonate, letting the sound fill the space naturally. There was a patience in his playing, a sense of purpose that was different from the flashy performances of others. Slowly, the piece began to unfold, revealing layers of emotion and a depth that could only come from someone who had lived every note. At first, the audience reacted with mild curiosity, but as the music continued, something began to change. The director leaned forward in his chair, his eyes fixed on the pianist. He was no longer taking notes or watching critically. He was listening, fully absorbed by the story being told through the keys. The other musicians, who had been preparing for their own performances, now looked on in silence. They were captivated, unsure of what they were witnessing, but unable to look away. The piece grew gradually, not with speed or complexity, but with emotion. The young pianist's fingers moved with precision and grace, each chord perfectly placed, each pause intentional. It was as if he were speaking through the piano, telling a story of longing, hope, and quiet determination. The music was not just a display of technical skill. It was a reflection of his soul, a window into his experiences and the hours of dedication that had led him here. As he played, he remembered all the times he had been overlooked, the moments when others doubted his talent or dismissed his efforts. Each memory added intensity to the music, making it richer and more compelling. The audience felt it too, even if they didn't know the details. They could sense the honesty and passion behind each note. The whispers of doubt that had filled the room earlier were gone, replaced by a deep, attentive silence. He reached the middle section of the piece, where the melody became more intricate and layered. It was a challenging part, requiring both technical skill and emotional control. He had practiced it countless times, and now he played it effortlessly, letting the music rise and fall naturally. The room seemed to hold its breath, waiting for each note to land. Even the other musicians, who had been confident just moments before, now watched with awe. They realized that this performance was not about competition or showing off. It was about creating something truly moving. The young pianist didn't notice the looks of surprise or admiration. He was completely immersed in the music. Each key he pressed was an extension of his feelings, a way to communicate what words could never express. The director, usually composed and reserved, now showed a rare glimpse of emotion. His eyes were wide, and he leaned closer, as if trying to absorb every nuance of the performance. He could feel the story unfolding, the music telling him things that no one had said out loud. As the piece progressed toward its climax, the young pianist allowed the music to swell, building tension and releasing it with a natural rhythm. It was not rushed or forced. It was organic, flowing directly from his heart to the piano and into the room. The audience was completely silent, hanging on every note. They were not just listening. They were experiencing the emotions he was expressing. The laughter and judgment that had greeted him earlier were now memories, replaced by a deep respect for the talent and dedication before them. Finally, he reached the last notes of the composition. They were soft, fading gently, leaving a lingering sense of peace and completion. For a moment, the room was so quiet that it felt as though time had stopped. The director closed his eyes, overwhelmed by the beauty of what he had just witnessed. The other musicians sat stunned, unsure how to respond. Some had expected to outperform him, but they now understood that this performance was on a completely different level. When he lifted his hands from the keys, there was a brief pause. Then, slowly, a few people began to clap. The applause grew, spreading through the room until it was a wave of appreciation for the young pianist's talent and emotional depth. He didn't smile broadly or seek attention. He simply nodded humbly, acknowledging the recognition without letting it change who he was. For him, the most important thing was that his music had been heard, understood, and felt. That day, he realized something important. The challenge of performing in front of a critical audience, of facing doubt and underestimation, had been necessary. It had allowed him to show not just his skill, but the depth of his passion and the authenticity of his art. The audition had tested more than his ability to play the piano. It had tested his commitment to music, his resilience, and his courage to remain true to himself. As he left the studio, people continued to talk about the performance. The whispers were no longer of doubt or amusement. They were of admiration and surprise. Some of the other musicians approached him, offering quiet congratulations, acknowledging that they had underestimated him. The director, meanwhile, was already considering how to include this young pianist in his project, realizing that he had found someone truly exceptional. For the young pianist, the day was a turning point. It wasn't just about recognition or opportunity. It was about proving to himself that persistence, dedication, and authenticity could overcome doubt and judgment. He had faced a room full of skeptics, and through his music, he had shown that true talent cannot be hidden or dismissed. His journey was far from over, but this moment marked the beginning of something remarkable. A chance to share his gift with the world and to touch hearts in a way that only music can. The young pianist had grown used to being underestimated, but nothing prepared him for the room that day. The quiet murmurs of other musicians and staff still lingered in the air, a faint reminder of how appearances can mislead people. He had learned to ignore it over the years. What mattered was the music, not the opinions whispered behind his back. He had faced skepticism his entire life, and now, standing in that studio, he understood that this was another step on the long road of proving himself. Not just to the world, but to himself. As he took his place at the grand piano, the room seemed unusually still. The previous performances had ended, leaving an echo of polite applause and some impressed nods. Yet, many eyes were still fixed on him with doubt. They saw a young man in simple clothing, carrying himself humbly, and they had already made their judgment. Some whispered that he couldn't compete with the other performers, that his modest demeanor meant he lacked skill or confidence. He could feel their skepticism, but he didn't allow it to shake him. Instead, he let it fuel his focus, reminding himself why he had devoted so many years to the piano. He placed his fingers on the keys, feeling the familiar texture beneath them, and closed his eyes for a brief moment. Memories of childhood practice sessions, hours spent perfecting small melodies, and nights filled with music filled his mind. Every mistake, every challenge, every moment of doubt had led to this. He wasn't here to impress anyone with speed or flashiness. He was here to speak through his music, to show what he had learned through dedication and passion. The first notes he played were gentle and deliberate, almost shy, yet there was a clarity to them that immediately caught the attention of those in the room. Unlike the previous performances that relied on showy gestures or complex arrangements, his music spoke with simplicity and honesty. There was no rush, no attempt to overwhelm the audience. Instead, each note was carefully placed, a reflection of thought and emotion. Slowly, the room shifted from polite attention to genuine curiosity, as people began to realize that this performance was different. He allowed the melody to unfold naturally, weaving together layers of emotion that told a story without words. The music flowed like a river, at times calm and serene, at times swelling with quiet intensity. He didn't glance at the audience, didn't try to gauge their reaction. He focused solely on the keys, letting the music guide him. Every chord, every pause, every gentle rise and fall of the notes reflected the years of practice and the depth of feeling he had invested in his art. The director, who had initially been observing with a critical eye, leaned forward as the piece continued. He was captivated by the unexpected depth and nuance, realizing that this was not a performance meant to showcase technical skill alone. It was an expression of something far more personal and profound. The subtle shifts in tempo, the delicate balance of tension and release, and the emotional honesty resonated deeply, drawing him in despite his professional detachment. Other musicians, who had been confident in their own flashy performances, now watched with quiet awe. They had expected to outshine this young man, yet he was creating something entirely unique and compelling. The gentle authority of his playing, The confidence that came from years of quiet practice began to command respect. Whispers of doubt were replaced by a stunned silence, as the music transcended judgment and skepticism. As the piece progressed, he reached sections that demanded both technical skill and emotional depth. His fingers moved fluidly, each key pressed with purpose and control, but without any hint of showmanship. It was a natural mastery, honed through countless hours of disciplined practice, yet infused with the sensitivity and humanity that made the music resonate on a deeper level. Listeners felt the honesty in every note, recognizing that this performance came from the heart rather than the desire for recognition. The melody grew more intricate, weaving together multiple layers of harmony and emotion. It was a challenging passage, one that could easily have faltered under the pressure of an audience and the scrutiny of the director. Yet he played with steady confidence, allowing the music to breathe and flow organically. Each movement of his hands seemed effortless, though every gesture was precise, reflecting the years of preparation and refinement that had brought him to this point. The room was completely absorbed. Even those who had previously doubted him could not look away. Some felt a stirring of emotion, a sense of connection to the music that transcended words. They were experiencing the story he had written, living through the highs and lows, the quiet moments, and the surges of intensity. The laughter and judgment from earlier had completely disappeared, replaced by a profound respect for the young pianist's skill and artistry. He reached the emotional peak of the composition, allowing the music to swell with feeling. The director, usually composed and analytical, could no longer hide his reaction. He was visibly moved, leaning forward in his chair as if to absorb every nuance. The other musicians, who had once been competitors, now sat in quiet admiration. They realized that this was not just a performance. It was a revelation. The young pianist was communicating something deeper, something that could not be measured by technique alone. As the final notes echoed through the room, there was a moment of complete silence. The music lingered in the air, leaving a sense of awe and reflection. Then, slowly, the room responded with applause, first tentative, then growing into a wave of appreciation. The young pianist lifted his hands from the keys, standing quietly, acknowledging the recognition with a humble nod. There was no boastfulness, no need to draw attention to himself. The music had spoken, and that was enough. The director approached, still visibly impressed, and began discussing possibilities for the young pianist to contribute to future projects. Other musicians offered quiet congratulations, some even admitting that they had underestimated him. For the young pianist, these moments of recognition were meaningful, but the greatest reward was the knowledge that he had stayed true to his art. He had faced doubt and skepticism and had allowed his music to convey his story, touching the hearts of those who listened. Walking out of the studio that day, he reflected on the journey that had led him here. The years of practice, the quiet determination, and the unwavering belief in his own abilities had culminated in this moment. He understood that talent alone was not enough. It was dedication, passion, and authenticity that allowed him to create something truly remarkable. This experience was a confirmation that perseverance and commitment could overcome doubt and judgment. He knew that there would be more challenges ahead, more skeptics, and more moments of uncertainty. But he also knew that the music within him was strong enough to face them. He had discovered that true artistry comes not from seeking approval but from expressing oneself fully and honestly. And with that realization, he felt a quiet confidence, ready to continue his journey, to create, to inspire, and to share the music that had always been a part of his soul. The young pianist had spent years preparing for moments like this, though he had never imagined the level of attention he was receiving. The room, once filled with whispers and quiet laughter, now held a different energy. People were leaning forward in their seats, eyes fixed on him, waiting for every note to unfold. The director, known for his sharp judgment and critical eye, was completely captivated. He had seen many talented musicians, but something about this young man's performance felt different. It was not just skill or technique. It was a story being told through sound. He closed his eyes briefly, feeling the keys beneath his fingers. The grand piano seemed to respond to his touch as if it were an extension of himself. The room around him disappeared. There were no judgments, no whispers, no preconceived ideas. There was only the music, the notes flowing from his heart through his fingers and into the space, touching the audience in ways words never could. Each chord was deliberate, each pause intentional, and every rise and fall of the melody carried emotion that could be felt in the chest of anyone listening. He began the first section of his piece, soft and gentle, with a kind of tentative grace. The simplicity of the notes was deceptive. Though quiet, they were charged with feeling, capturing the attention of every person in the room. Some listeners leaned forward unconsciously, drawn into the story without fully realizing it. The music was speaking to them, stirring memories, emotions, and thoughts that were personal yet universal. He felt the weight of their attention but did not allow it to interfere. This was not about approval or applause. It was about expression, and he allowed himself to be fully immersed. As he continued, the melody grew, flowing naturally from quiet introspection to gentle intensity. He had chosen this piece carefully, knowing it required both technical skill and emotional depth. Every note was a reflection of years of practice and life experience. He had learned that music was not just about speed or complexity but about conveying truth, and that truth was what he brought to every performance. Each chord, each subtle shift in tempo, added layers to the story he wanted to tell. The director leaned forward, intrigued. His usual composed expression was replaced with one of wonder. He had been through countless auditions and performances, yet this was unlike anything he had seen before. The young pianist wasn't trying to impress with speed or flash. He was creating something meaningful, something that reached beyond technique and touched the heart. The other musicians, who had once appeared confident and self-assured, now watched in awe, recognizing that they were witnessing a rare kind of artistry. The young pianist moved seamlessly into the more complex part of the piece. The notes flowed quickly, yet smoothly, creating a tapestry of sound that was both intricate and cohesive. He had practiced this passage countless times, and now it felt natural, almost effortless. The room was completely silent, save for the piano, and the silence was filled with anticipation. Every listener seemed to be holding their breath, caught in the delicate balance between tension and release, emotion and technical mastery. He played with a rhythm that was both disciplined and expressive, allowing the music to breathe. There was a story here, a journey, and he guided the audience along every step. He remembered the countless nights he had spent alone, fingers aching from hours of practice, learning to perfect not just the notes but the feeling behind them. That work was finally paying off, translating into a performance that was deeply personal yet universally resonant. The middle section of the piece was where the music swelled, growing in richness and intensity. It was a moment that required not only skill but courage, as the young pianist had to convey vulnerability and strength simultaneously. His hands moved with precision, yet every movement was filled with emotion. The audience could sense it. Some leaned closer, others closed their eyes, letting the music wash over them. It was no longer just a performance. It was a shared experience, a connection formed through sound and feeling. As he approached the climax of the piece, he allowed the music to soar. The room seemed to expand with each chord, and even the most skeptical observers were captivated. The director's eyes were wide, and he could not hide his admiration. He had seen talented musicians before, but rarely someone who could merge technical excellence with emotional depth so seamlessly. The young pianist was not only performing, he was communicating, telling a story that was felt rather than analyzed. The final section of the composition was deliberate, drawing the energy down gently while leaving a lingering impression of beauty and emotion. Each note was allowed to resonate, each chord hanging in the air like a delicate echo. The young pianist had practiced this countless times, but in this moment, it was as if the music was alive, responding to him and to the room. The audience was completely absorbed, experiencing the piece not just as a performance, but as a journey through emotion and human experience. When the last note faded, there was a silence that seemed to stretch endlessly. It was not awkward or uncomfortable. It was the silence of awe, of hearts and minds touched by something profound. The applause began slowly, then grew, spreading throughout the room as people expressed their admiration and appreciation. It was sincere, unrestrained, a recognition of the young pianist's extraordinary talent and the emotional depth of his performance. The young pianist stood quietly, taking in the reaction without seeking it. He had not performed for applause or recognition. He had performed to convey something true and meaningful. Yet the response was gratifying, a validation of the years of dedication and struggle that had brought him to this point. The director approached, visibly moved, eager to discuss opportunities for collaboration and projects that could benefit from such genuine artistry. The other musicians, once his skeptics, now offered quiet congratulations. They had witnessed a performance that transcended technique, a display of passion and dedication that could not be matched by skill alone. Some admitted to themselves that they had underestimated him, and in that recognition, the young pianist's presence became a quiet but undeniable inspiration. As he left the studio that day, he felt a sense of calm satisfaction. He had proven to himself that perseverance, authenticity, and dedication could overcome doubt and judgment. The music had spoken and it had been heard. He knew there would be more challenges ahead, more moments where he would have to prove himself. But he also knew that the strength of his passion and the sincerity of his art would guide him. That day marked a turning point in his life. It was a reminder that talent is nurtured through patience and practice, that recognition is earned through authenticity, and that true artistry comes not from seeking approval, but from expressing the depth of one's soul. The young pianist walked away, ready to continue his journey, creating music that would inspire, move, and touch the hearts of those willing to listen. The young pianist had spent so many years working quietly, almost invisibly, perfecting his craft that being in a room full of people who doubted him still felt strange. The day of the audition had already shown him glimpses of what could happen when his music spoke for itself. But there was still one more challenge to face. This part of the audition would not just test his skill. It would test his courage and the depth of emotion he could convey under pressure. He walked to the grand piano with the same quiet determination he always carried. He adjusted the bench, feeling the familiar smoothness of the keys under his fingertips. Around him, the room was filled with whispers, some subtle, some more overt. Other musicians watched, some curious, some skeptical, while the director's eyes were fixed on him, observing intently. Despite all of this, he did not let the attention distract him. He had learned long ago that external opinions were fleeting, but the music he carried within him was enduring. He began the piece softly, letting the first notes float into the room. They were gentle, almost fragile, yet they held a clarity that demanded attention. There was no rush, no need to impress with speed or flamboyance. Each note was deliberate, each pause meaningful, creating a rhythm that felt natural and alive. The audience, initially quiet, began to lean in, sensing that something special was unfolding before them. The music was speaking directly to them, bypassing skepticism and judgment, reaching instead for something deeper. As the composition progressed, the young pianist's confidence grew. He had spent countless nights perfecting this piece, learning not just the technical aspects but the emotional weight behind every chord. Now, with the room watching and listening, he poured that experience into each movement. The melody rose and fell, capturing a range of emotions from quiet introspection to intense feeling. The director, usually composed and detached, could not hide his reaction. He was drawn in, leaning forward as if to catch every nuance of the performance. The complexity of the piece increased, yet the young pianist played it with a natural grace that made it seem effortless. His fingers moved with precision, guided by years of practice, yet every note carried a sense of humanity and vulnerability. It was not just about technical skill. It was about expressing something real, something that could touch the hearts of those listening. The room seemed to hold its breath, each person fully immersed in the story being told through the music. He remembered all the times he had been dismissed or overlooked, the moments when others doubted his ability, when they laughed at his humble appearance or questioned his talent. All came rushing back. But instead of making him anxious, these memories fueled his playing. They added depth to the performance, making the music resonate with authenticity. Every chord, every delicate pause, every shift in tempo carried with it the weight of experience and the strength of persistence. The director's expression changed as he listened, from curiosity to surprise to awe. He had seen many musicians in his career, yet few could combine technical skill with emotional depth so seamlessly. The young pianist was not just performing, he was communicating. He was telling a story, inviting the audience into his world, allowing them to experience the highs and lows, the quiet moments and the surges of emotion that had shaped him. The other musicians watched in silent admiration, realizing that they were witnessing something rare and extraordinary. As the piece reached its midpoint, the music became more intense. It was a challenging section, requiring both dexterity and emotional control. The young pianist's hands moved fluidly, each note perfectly placed, yet the performance never felt mechanical or forced. The audience could feel the emotion behind the music, sensing the dedication and vulnerability that went into each movement. The room was silent, but the silence was alive with anticipation, with the shared experience of witnessing something exceptional. He allowed the music to swell, letting the melody rise and fall naturally, creating a sense of journey and progression. The audience was captivated, leaning in to catch every nuance. The director's eyes were wide, reflecting a rare openness to emotion that his professional demeanor often concealed. He was witnessing a young musician who had not only mastered his instrument, but had also mastered the art of storytelling through sound. It was a moment that transcended the usual standards of audition performance, a moment that demanded recognition. The young pianist continued with unwavering focus, guiding the music to its emotional peak. The room felt charged with the intensity of the performance. Each note carried meaning, each chord reflected years of dedication, and every pause allowed the listeners to absorb the depth of feeling being shared. The director, usually analytical and reserved, leaned forward, fully absorbed in the performance. He could sense the authenticity, the honesty, and the quiet brilliance that radiated from the young pianist's playing. As the piece moved toward its conclusion, the young pianist allowed the music to settle gently, leaving lingering notes that hung in the air like a soft echo. The audience remained silent, fully immersed in the experience, letting the music resonate within them. There was a sense of completion, of resolution, as if the story had been told and understood. The applause began slowly, tentative at first, then growing into a wave of appreciation that swept through the room. It was heartfelt, unforced, a recognition of the dedication, talent, and emotional depth that had gone into the performance. The young pianist rose from the bench quietly, acknowledging the applause with a humble nod. He did not seek the attention. He had only sought to share his music honestly and fully. The director approached him, visibly moved, discussing opportunities and expressing admiration for the extraordinary talent he had just witnessed. Other musicians, once doubtful, offered congratulations, their expressions a mix of respect and awe. They had underestimated him, and now they could not ignore the depth of his skill and the sincerity of his artistry. Leaving the studio, the young pianist felt a quiet sense of fulfillment. The journey had been long, filled with doubts, obstacles, and moments of uncertainty, but all of it had led to this point. He had faced skepticism and judgment, and through his music, he had shown the world what true dedication and talent could achieve. The recognition and admiration were meaningful, but the most important reward was the knowledge that he had remained true to himself and to his art. He understood that the road ahead would have more challenges, more moments where his abilities would be tested, and more opportunities to prove himself. But he also knew that the strength of his passion, the sincerity of his music, and the dedication he had poured into his craft would guide him through. The experience had reinforced a powerful truth, that perseverance, authenticity, and emotional honesty in art could touch hearts, inspire others, and transform perceptions. That day marked a significant turning point in his life. It was a reminder that talent alone is not enough, that true artistry comes from a place of dedication and emotional truth. He had learned that recognition is earned not through appearance or performance for approval, but through consistent effort, resilience, and the courage to express oneself fully. The young pianist walked forward, ready to continue his journey, creating music that would move, inspire, and resonate with all who were willing to listen. He knew that every challenge he faced would only strengthen his artistry, and that the music he carried within him had the power to leave a lasting impact on the world. The young pianist had come a long way. Every step of his journey had been filled with small victories and quiet struggles, and now he stood on the edge of something new, something transformative. The audition was over, but the impact of his performance continued to resonate. People in the room, from the director to fellow musicians, were still talking about the depth and emotion they had just witnessed. He had not only proven his talent but had reminded everyone that true artistry comes from authenticity and dedication. After leaving the studio, he found a quiet corner to reflect. He thought about all the years he had spent practicing alone, the countless nights where no one watched or applauded. He thought about the moments when people doubted him, laughed at him, or dismissed his efforts. Yet all those experiences had shaped him, strengthened his resolve, and prepared him for this moment. He realized that talent alone was not enough. It was the combination of perseverance, patience, and belief in oneself that had brought him here. Word of his performance spread quickly. Friends and family who had supported him quietly were proud but unsurprised, knowing how much he had poured into his music. Fellow musicians, who had once underestimated him, were now filled with respect. The director, impressed by his skill and emotional depth, approached him with offers to collaborate on future projects. Invitations to perform in concerts, participate in recordings, and compose for films began to arrive. For the first time, he saw the doors that dedication could open, and it was exhilarating. But despite the recognition, the young pianist remained humble. He knew that success was not measured by applause or fame, but by the ability to touch hearts through music. He continued to practice, to compose, and to explore new melodies. Each day he spent at the piano was a reminder of why he had started in the first place, the love of music itself. He cherished the moments of connection, the way a single note could evoke emotions, bring comfort, or inspire someone in ways that words could not. As he began to take on new projects, he noticed a shift in how people interacted with him. They listened more intently, respected his opinions, and sought his guidance. But he never let it change who he was. He treated every interaction with kindness, every collaboration with care, and every performance with dedication. He had learned that humility, combined with talent, created a powerful presence that inspired trust and admiration. One day, while preparing for a new performance, he reflected on the journey that had brought him here. He thought about the countless hours spent alone at the piano, the struggles to be heard, and the moments of doubt that had seemed overwhelming at the time. He realized that those challenges were not obstacles but stepping stones. Each one had taught him something valuable: patience, resilience, and the importance of staying true to oneself. These lessons, more than anything, had shaped the musician he had become. The young pianist also became aware of the responsibility that came with his talent. He understood that his music could influence, inspire, and comfort people in ways that went beyond entertainment. With this awareness, he began to approach his work with even greater intention. Every composition, every performance, and every collaboration became an opportunity to share a piece of his heart and to connect with others on a deeper level. He felt a profound sense of purpose, knowing that his music could make a difference in someone's life. Opportunities continued to grow. He was invited to perform at prestigious venues, collaborate with renowned artists, and even teach younger musicians who were just beginning their own journeys. He approached each opportunity with the same dedication and focus that had carried him through years of practice. Whether in front of a small group of students or a large audience, he remained committed to authenticity and emotional expression, ensuring that his music always carried the message of perseverance and heart. In quiet moments, he would reflect on the first time he had played for an audience and been laughed at or underestimated. The memory was no longer painful but a source of motivation and perspective. It reminded him that appearances can be deceiving, that talent and dedication often go unnoticed until they are given the right opportunity. He realized that those moments of doubt had been essential, pushing him to refine his craft and to approach every performance with sincerity and passion. The young pianist also found joy in sharing his story with others. He spoke about the importance of dedication, the value of patience, and the power of believing in oneself. He encouraged aspiring musicians to practice not for recognition but for the love of music and the growth it brings. Through workshops, lectures, and informal conversations, he inspired countless young artists to pursue their dreams, reminding them that true talent is revealed not by appearances, but by perseverance and heart. Even as he gained recognition, he remained grounded. He continued to wake up early to practice, to explore new compositions, and to challenge himself with complex pieces. He understood that mastery is an ongoing journey, one that requires constant effort and an open mind. Every day at the piano was a chance to learn, to grow, and to connect with the universal language of music. Looking back, he could see how far he had come. From a quiet child practicing alone in a small room to a musician admired and respected by peers, teachers, and audiences, his journey was a testament to the power of dedication and passion. Yet he knew that the journey was far from over. There were always new pieces to learn, new compositions to create, and new opportunities to inspire others. Each performance was a chance to continue expressing the depth of human emotion and to touch hearts in ways that only music could. The young pianist often thought about the director who had once watched him play in that studio, amazed by the authenticity and emotion of his music. That moment had been pivotal, a validation of years of quiet effort and perseverance. But more importantly, it had been a reminder that staying true to oneself and one's art could open doors in ways that talent alone could not. He carried that lesson with him in every performance, every composition, and every interaction. As his career continued to grow, he remained focused on the essence of music: connection, expression, and emotional truth. Each note he played was a reflection of his journey, his experiences, and the countless hours of practice that had brought him to that moment. He understood that music was more than sound. It was a way to communicate the deepest parts of the human experience, to inspire, comfort, and bring joy to those who listened. In the end, the young pianist knew that success was not measured by fame or recognition, but by the ability to touch lives through music. He had faced doubt, ridicule, and underestimation, but he had never wavered in his dedication to his craft. Through patience, perseverance, and an unwavering commitment to authenticity, he had created something lasting and meaningful. And as he continued to share his music with the world, he knew that the journey, though challenging, was also deeply rewarding, filled with opportunities to inspire, connect, and leave a lasting impact on everyone who listened.